So tell us a little bit about Daggerheart. What was the
Yeah, what's it
adventure,
like?
and
What
what did you
changed
play?
since
Like,
Gen Con? What did
yeah,
you do?
didn't you? Well, you said
Yeah,
you spent a lot of
so
time building your character, like way too much time.
right. I wish I kept better track of the actual timing. I guess we probably didn't even start really getting into anything until like 1:30 anyway. But then that time, like the next hour and a half, was basically going over some rules and then making our own characters. Like I very much figured this was going to be like, here's a pre-gen, okay, you're in the woods, and then blah blah blah. Like I thought we were just gonna kind of walk right into a game, but it was very much, like a little bit of a walkthrough of the rules, which was kind of the stuff that you guys already know. It was just like kind of the core rule of like 2d12, roll high. You're adding one of your six stats, which are similar to the D&D stats. I have my sheet over here, but do have like different names for the most part. Um, I think they probably explained health at that point, which is in like thresholds. Basically, it's like enemies deal a certain amount of damage, and then depending on where that damage falls between these different thresholds you have, then you only take either one, two, or three hit points at a time. But our first level characters only had 6 hit points to start, so you can only really take a couple hits. But it's
So
cool
that's
because
still the same from before with the thresholds, where your thresholds were
yeah,
set by things like armor and other things that made you tougher.
yeah, and so in this case, I think the thresholds were set purely by the class because like the
Oh, okay.
character sheet that I have here is for just my class. Um, and it says right like on it in type, what my minor, major, and severe thresholds are. Armor, which may have changed since the original, because I didn't remember how it was, at least in the
Oh,
original.
I
I
may
don't
have
know.
also forgotten what set the thresholds from when I was reading about the original.
Sure. I mean, well, yeah, the thresholds I'm pretty sure were part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The armor I think might be new, but it basically is because, okay, those enemies are automatically dealing damage, like they do not roll to hit.
Right.
So what you can do as a player is roll a die for your armor, and so different armor types, I believe, have a different armor types have a different die, and you can roll that to subtract incoming damage.
Ah.
And that way it might fall in, a lower threshold, basically.
So yeah,
But then
that's
as you
what it
do that,
was.
you're,
That's how it connected to the thresholds. I knew it was
yeah,
somehow related to the threshold, but it's a random
yes.
addition to your threshold essentially by subtracting the damage.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's like when you get hit, if like I only had a D4 armor die. So if I was only like 2 points above one of my thresholds, I know it's like probably better to roll for it. But otherwise it's like, nah, I'll just take it because you also have a limited number of times that you can, cash in that like armor as a resource basically to roll that.
And then it
Um,
breaks and you have to repair it or
They didn't go over that because they said you pretty much repair it during like downtime, like rest,
okay.
basically.
So it's kind
So
of
we
a
didn't.
per rest.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have the rules. Okay, actually, I can see during a short rest, repair armor. Describe how you spend time quickly repairing your armor and clear 2 used armor slots. And for reference, as a warrior, anyway, I had 6 armor slots to start. So that's like during a short rest, you could heal 2. And during a long rest, I think you can heal all of them. So that was one thing that was new. And I think the main thing that was new, although again, I don't remember 100% how this worked in the original version, but a lot of people were interested in this when I talked about it in my video today, was the initiative order, like for lack of a better general term for this, where instead of rolling initiative, which I'd love to actually hear, we can maybe talk about right after I sum it up, how you guys do initiative. Because like at my table, I've like totally stopped rolling initiative. I feel like it is kind of a pause in combat right before you get into stuff. But anyway, instead of rolling initiative and like getting an order that you have to arrange, and instead of just going around the table, which is like what a lot of lighter games at least do these days, I feel like, and it's pretty much how I run it at my table. This worked by action tokens. So there was no set order to like what players go when. Like anyone, like if you have an idea, it's like, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to use this thing to do blah, blah, blah. Nice. But then when you do that, you put one of these little like tokens in front of the GM. Like he just had this little card. Spencer just had this little action tracker card in front of him. So you put that on the card, and then so players can continue to go like that. But the way the GM gets their turn essentially is like when a player rolls their action with fear, meaning out of their 2d12, their fear die was just higher than their hope die. That's all it means. Like they could have still succeeded or whatever. So it's like basically a 50-50 shot of that rolling with fear. Or if they roll and fail, whatever they were trying to do, then the GM can go after that player. And when the GM goes, they kind of build their turn by cashing in a number of those action tokens that were put on the tracker. So if like 5 players, like if every player went before the GM decided to go, because they also don't have to go, I guess, during those moments. And I already see someone saying it's crunchy. It was so smooth. Like it's maybe just hard for me to explain because like I'm not looking at the rules or whatever. But it was so smooth, like because every player could just go whenever they wanted, and then the GM knew when they had to go. That's really all you need to know. And they
So
just
that
go
means
by
that
like,
if you succeed and roll hope higher for the whole round, everybody does, that the GM cannot go that round. Is that right? Or do they get a mercy where they get to go at the end of the turn automatically?
as I understand,
Nothing
as
happened.
I understand it, because again, he didn't like tell us all the rules of this, but it really almost seemed like there wasn't like a defined round, because I'm sure
when do you
there
get
must
back
be for certain effects.
When do you get back the token?
When do you get back I guess it was just after he spends them, after the GM in this, Spencer was
But
spending.
you can't possibly get into a. So therefore, there must be some kind of mercy rule where the GM eventually can spend them when they have all of them, because otherwise you can get into a deadlock where nobody has a token and the GM is not allowed to cash them in.
Well, there was no.
Everybody
I guess
rolled
there was no like limit on the number of tokens, as far as I understood, because it was literally just like,
oh, you
here,
just have an unlimited number of tokens. So
yeah, like the players, like he just like there was some number where he was just like, yeah, have at least like 7 of these or something. But remember, there's literally a greater than 50-50 shot of the GM getting a turn every time a player goes.
Because
so it's very unlikely. It's very unlikely that the GM's going to be stuck and not be able to go after, every player gets a chance.
No, that's interesting. Not in terms of whether the GM can go or not, but the fact that every player has an unlimited number of them, essentially, because that is going to lead to, I think, some social contract concerns where you have one player who's super excited about what their character can do, and it's just like, all right, I'm going to do this. All right, now I'm going to do that. Okay, now I'm going to do this. And they just try to take all of their turns an unlimited number of times. And other people are like, wait, hold on, I want to take my turns. Like, no, I could just keep taking my turns. And so like you would have to like talk it out ahead of time, because there's no built-in mechanic to stop someone who is trying to take turns over and over again. It sounds like
I agree that is what it sounds like. I assume there is something, and that's why I even mentioned in my video, like none of us were like trying to go multiple times in a row, or trying to like 2 people, like we didn't even have it where like 2 people tried to go at the same time, and then there, no like bickering back and forth about, but I want to do this thing first. Like nothing like that happened. I'm sure that could happen if there's no mechanic for it, but yeah, it didn't happen to us. So that was fine. And yeah, everybody, like, and even like, my wife Grace and my friend Steven were there. Like they didn't get to play in this game, unfortunately. There was like already 5 or 6 players or something. But they were there watching, and like everybody thought that was a pretty interesting mechanic. And apparently, so here's the other thing. Apparently this is already how a Conan RPG does it. I don't know for sure, but I talked to somebody else about it later in the day, and they said that, yeah, like this isn't 100% a new thing. And I did see a question about like, can the GM like only go for like one character or something? And it's like, no, they were able to spend like a bunch of these things, so like multiple NPCs could go, or they could spend like a bunch of things on one guy so he could do something really cool. So it was just very much just like a resource that the GM had at their disposal. And then there was another mechanic, not explained at all, so I didn't even mention it in my video, but where the GM could take a couple of those action tokens and like trade them for, I want to say it was called like a fear something that must have just been a lot more powerful, basically.
Cool.
But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And actually, that could have been like an automatic, like, okay, I just get to go now move that the GM has.
Oh, so that could be the mercy rule where it's just statistically unlikely, but the players rolled like 8 times and they always succeeded and they never rolled fear. And the GM's like, okay, I've got 8 of these. I'm going to trade in 2 to go with the other 6 because otherwise you guys are probably going to end this fight and everything's going to be dead and I'll have done nothing. And this only happens like once every like 1,000
it could happen
once every 1,000 encounters, but it happened this time, so I'm going to do it. So that's just a smart design to put in some kind of a release valve just to weird luck.
And I just saw somebody comment, it sounds like a Doom Point variant, and I think that's what it was called in this Conan RPG that Runehammer was telling me about.
What was the story? Was there an actual story?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great question. So yeah, we got getting hung up on mechanics. So I built this character who was a fawn, which is supposed to be like a deer person, but I fashioned him more like a goat because I had this idea of him having this like mountainous background. Because basically, right off the bat, you choose your ancestry, essentially your race, and you choose your community, which is kind of like a region, but it's basically like your background. And so mine was a ridge-born fawn. So I was basically this like mountainous guy. And one of my questions, because this was part of character creation, is that on your character sheet for your class, there's a bunch of questions that it asks like you specifically to, basically just improv an answer, but like you make up whatever you want. And one of my goals here was like, what legendary place have you always wanted to visit and why is it so special? And I wrote down that I've always wanted to climb like the highest mountain in the world, and like we made up a name, whatever. And another question was, somebody defeated you in battle years ago and left you to die. Who was it? And why was it such a betrayal? And so I wrote down that I was once like acting as a guide for a group of adventurers, and they like left me to die somewhere. So based on those 2 things and a couple other questions from other players, while we took our break for lunch at 3:30 or whatever, Spenser took like 15 minutes and basically built this adventure where we were like heading through the woods, like back to some town, and I don't remember the names of these locations because they were just kind of out of nowhere. But and we were attacked on the way, so we did get right into the first combat, but it was just by like some basically random like wild gnomes that were trying to steal our stuff. So we fought them. That was our exposure to combat, which all, like I said, felt pretty smooth. And then we got into this town and found that this NPC who was near and dear to one of the other players in this group, their home was broken into. So we were investigating in here and then basically found traces that were relevant, like a clue that like, oh my gosh, this was like perpetrated by the party that betrayed my character. And so we were able to like track them down, and like it led to us climbing up this mountain, which was like, again, like one of my character's goals, and like other people's goals also came into this. But then we learned that there was also a connection to some monster that was, I can't remember who that was tied to, but there was basically like a monster and this evil party had like captured this one NPC, brought them up this mountain, and were basically doing some kind of ritual. And then that's like kind of when we literally got up there and like saw the scene, like that was actually the end of the adventure. We had to like cut it off on this literal cliffhanger because it was already like 5 o'clock or something at that
literal
point.
Cliffhanger on a literal cliff.
Sounds pretty cool.